Pastor, theologian, scholar, and regular Good Catholic contributor, Father Jeffrey Kirby, joins Good Catholic's Rachel Shrader on the Truth Be Bold podcast, a fearless, down-to-earth weekly discussion on the topics at the forefront of our Catholic life today.
Welcome, friends, to the podcast Truth Be Bold. I'm Father Jeff Kirby.
And I am Rachel Shrader.
And this is the podcast that meets you in the trenches where you are, tries to address real issues that the average Catholic has to deal with, trying to be a disciple of the Lord Jesus in the midst of the 21st century. Questions abound, moral dilemmas, social issues. We try to address them all and give guidance and encouragement on how we're called to live as Christians. So what I'd like to do for this episode, Rachel, we were going through different tasks and questions and moral issues and so on. We selected advanced directives. Mm-hmm. And I think this is so important. First, we should probably clarify, in case people aren't familiar with the term.
Correct, yeah.
That advanced directives are basically the directives, the guidance that someone prepares while they're healthy, mm-hmm. Or when they first learn that they're sick, that indicates the type of care that they would want or not want. Mm-hmm. And so, again, advanced, because the person is not yet to the point of actively dying, and directives, it's their wishes, what they would like to be done or not done. So advanced directives have their place, but here's our problem as Catholics sometimes, is people will recall that when we talk about ordinary and extraordinary care, so ordinary care is morally obligatory, morally binding. Extraordinary care is morally optional. And people might have been caught off when we did our episode on these questions of ordinary, extraordinary care. They might have been caught off by the fact that there's a lot of discernment that goes into these. Mm-hmm. And sometimes one treatment could be morally obligatory for one person, morally optional for another. And there's a lot of discernment that goes into that. And the discernment is in large part influenced by the factors in the state of affairs, those real state of affairs. So the person's age, their capacity for pain, the percentage of success, the severity of the side effects of the care, and so many other conditions that are a part of this. Well, if we remember all of that, and then we talk about advanced directives, how can we give an advanced directive to a state of affairs that we don't know yet? Mm-hmm. And there is the problem sometimes with advanced directives. Now, as Catholics, we can make advanced directives. And in fact, in many places we should, in order, especially if our loved ones aren't practicing the faith or if they adhere to a different worldview than that of what we Christians hold to. So advanced directives have their place, but we have to understand their limitations. Because, again, we're trying to give advanced directives to a state of affairs that we don't know. And those state of affairs can determine whether something is morally obligatory or morally optional. So we just want to approach advanced directives with caution. Now, as soon as we say all this, the real battleground in end-of-life care, and especially for those who are actively dying, is nutrition, hydration. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back and kind of just foot stomp that the medical community uses these terms, but they define them differently from we as Catholics. And our approach to these terms are far more holistic. The medical community, it's very particular. So they'll say, well, nutrition, hydration, artificially administered is always extraordinary care. Okay, we would not agree with that as Catholics. No. And oftentimes with advanced directives, that oftentimes becomes the linchpin, because a lot of times they'll say, well, do you want or don't you want? Well, that's like saying, do you want to do evil or do you want to do good? And so we have to be very careful in terms of the language of the advanced directive that we use. There are a lot of advanced directives. Some of them are prepared by what we could call pro-death organizations, and that's trying to be as charitable as possible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is why when we do advanced directives, we want to make sure that we look for Catholic advanced directives. And they are out there. A lot of dioceses now will have them because a lot of times state laws are very different, and that can influence how advanced directives are done. So if we have a national advanced directive, we have to be careful, again, because of state laws. A person that's interested can say, if they're listening and they're saying, well, I haven't done advanced directives, where can I get this? I would say you could reach out to your local parish or to your diocesan office. And again, a lot of times dioceses now have these because people have been asking for them, and more bishops are aware, our state laws are actually different. So Texas is very different than New York. Hawaii is very different than South Carolina, and so on. So we would want to make sure that we have advanced directives that are binding nationally, but also in terms of our state. All right, here's just kind of going right to the trenches. Here's the, I can say, real deal, and something we want to be very careful and attentive to. The appointment of our medical proxy, also called a medical surrogate. This is the person that if we lose consciousness or are unable to make our own decisions for our medical care, this is the person who has the moral and legal authority to make decisions on our behalf. This is very important. The appointment of this person should be taken very seriously. And I have to tell you, Rachel, here's what most parents do. They say, oh, well, I'll just ask my oldest adult child. And in some families, that's great. In other families, that causes a lot of problems. And here's why. We want to make sure, first of all, that the person we appoint as our medical proxy or surrogate actually shares our worldview, that they understand what we want as a Catholic, why we want it, and will be an advocate for us in case the medical community puts a little pressure. It's not only that they agree, but that they will truly advocate for us, especially, again, when we cannot advocate for ourselves. So we want to make sure that they share our worldview. Also, and I hate to say this, but we live in a fallen world, we want to make sure that we're aware of what the person might benefit from our death. So if the person is our sole heir, there might be a conflict of interest. You know,
sad to say, but yeah, there might be.
Depending on the moral character of the person, we just have to be honest in terms of our assessment. Also, we want to make sure that the person is available. So now, obviously, we have mass communications here in the United States. So if someone's in a different state, it's more doable. But if a person is overseas, or if they are in an extremely different part of our state, for example, if we're in the Carolinas and our surrogate is in Hawaii, that's a massive time difference. That if something were to happen, trying to get a hold of that surrogate could be very difficult. So we want to make sure and assess in terms of availability. So with all these factors in mind, we want to make sure that we appoint a medical surrogate, a medical proxy, and we want to make sure that we do the proper paperwork according to our state, where the person is recognized by the state as the one who has the authority. Because here's the problem. If we don't appoint a medical proxy, one will be appointed for us. And depending on the state, there is an order. Now, in most states, it's the person's spouse, it's the person's oldest adult child, and then it's all through the children. And then after the children, it goes to the oldest sibling, and so on. Now, this varies from state to state. And that sounds so clean, doesn't it? Except I served on an ethics committee of a Catholic hospital, and you would be shocked at the battles that happen. Because the oldest child, is that the oldest stepchild or the oldest child from the person himself or herself? Spouse, is that an ex-spouse or is that the current legal spouse? You would be shocked at the battles that happen over the simple question of who is this person's proxy. So even in our state laws, if things are clear, and some states are not clear at all, right? You know, they almost ask for tension and battles within families. But even in the states where things appear to be relatively clear, it can be a disaster, because we just live in a society now where family is very disjointed, and we can have a lot of merged families. And so we have a lot of questions of former spouses, stepchildren, you know, and one's own biological child, and so on. The questions and debates go on. All this just a foot stomp why it's so important that a person take the time, reflect upon, you know, worldview, the benefits of the person upon one's death, their availability, and that a proxy is appointed and the paperwork is done so that is legally binding. Okay. Now, with all that said, here's what happens. Let's take the most extreme case. So there's a car accident and a person is taken to the hospital, and the person is there, the family member who is the proxy. All right, let's say that happens. And if they're not, they're called immediately, and they then come to the hospital, or they're on speakerphone and can make decisions. All right. Here's what's going to happen. The advance directive is there. And oftentimes the only person that might know in this case that there are advance directives is actually the medical proxy, because the ER doctor doesn't know. Our primary doctors should know, our attorneys should know, specialists within the medical field that we see regularly should know, but an emergency room doctor is not going to know. Right?
Yeah, you're a stranger to them. Yeah.
Right. This person's unconscious. Who's making the decisions? Are you? Oh, well, no, it's my brother, it's my sister. Well, I need them here or I need them on the phone, and so on. If there are advanced directives, the emergency room doctor will always defer to the medical proxy. Because the medical proxy is the one who has the legal and morally binding authority to make decisions.
And that overrides the advanced directives.
Overrides the advanced directives, exactly. Because at the end of the day, the doctor wants to talk to a human person who has the moral and legal authority. So that again is why it's so important that our medical proxy appreciate and understand our advanced directives, our Catholic advanced directives, and adheres to them. Because we can say in our advanced directives, I want nutrition, hydration, and so on, so on. And then a proxy is appointed because, well, it's my adult child. I don't want to hurt their feelings and so on. And then at the time the decision has to be made, is this care, this treatment going to be given? The advanced directive says one thing, the proxy adheres to a different worldview. The proxy is going to win because a doctor just needs someone to make the decision so that care can be given. Now, again, that's the more extreme case, but then we can go from there to different other scenarios. And the point of these is just to stress how important it really is that a person take the time, reflect and discern who's going to be the proxy that makes the decisions for my medical care when I'm unconscious or unable to make these decisions for myself. So that is advanced directives and proxy 101. Right?
Yeah, it seems really important to have conversations with your medical proxy, not just say, "Oh, this person's a good Catholic; they'll know what to do," type of thing. It's just like, no, have those conversations with them ahead of time about
Absolutely.
what the situations that they could run into. So
Yeah, and Rachel, those conversations are uncomfortable.
yeah, talking about death and
Right.
dying is generally uncomfortable. Yeah,
Right. And I tell people it's similarly with planning their funerals, pre-planning funerals. None of us want to do this. First of all, it can be a great spiritual exercise.
Yeah,
because it does
memento
remind
mori,
us.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, very much, yes. But it's so a good spiritual exercise, and it's also a tremendous act of charity and justice to our loved ones. So, if something should happen, then we know this is the proxy. These are the advanced directives. We could throw funeral planning in there. The pre-planning has already been done in terms of the funeral. Everything is done so that when the situation occurs, where we're seriously ill or when we're dying, then our loved ones in the midst of grief or anxiety do not have to worry about these questions. They've already been resolved. They know our wishes. It's clearly documented. Here's what we have to do. Whew, what do you think of that?
Oof, it's a lot, but it's extremely important. I actually have a question about when it's not clear who the medical proxy is for a certain patient and the hospital has to appoint one, or the legal authorities have to appoint one.
Yes.
Does that medical proxy have the authority to override advanced directives?
Yes.
Oof, that's rough.
Yes.
Don't let the government or anybody appoint one for you.
It's true.
The
It's true.
hospital, yeah.
And I mentioned how I served on ethics committees. The committee will make the decision and gives the physicians the green light, and things will move forward. And sometimes there can be an appeal, but by the time the appeal is done, the care has already been given or has already been suspended.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a moot point at that point. But it's so important. And again, uncomfortable, but just very pressing that this be done. And I will say that with some states, advanced directives are more binding than others. My experience has been in the extreme situations, the doctor will always listen to the proxy. And so there are some states where the advanced directives are basically guidelines. Some states they become more legally binding. I know that there have been lawsuits after the fact where another family member has sued a proxy because they didn't follow the advanced directives. In most states, those are dismissed. In some states, those have been adhered to, and then it was determined that it was a wrong decision to follow the proxy over the advanced directives. That's in, I think, only 2 or 3 states. It's very severe minority. But at the end of the day, at the time, it's going to be our medical proxy who makes the decision.
Right. And I just reemphasize the point that have these conversations with your medical proxy. Don't assume that they know things. Even if they're well-formed, some of these issues can get complex, and they can also get in the midst of a difficult situation, a hospital situation where you have medical personnel pressuring you to do certain things. Like, it's important to be able to know what you need to do in those situations. What a medical proxy, it's important for a medical proxy to know what they need to do in those situations and how they need to act. And so it's important for them to be well-formed. So have those conversations with them, make sure you're well-formed, they're well-formed, and that you're talking about these things. So.
Yes, and depending on someone's health, so for example, if someone has a known heart condition, again, this sounds so uncomfortable, but you can actually talk about possible scenarios with your proxy. So, for example, a person has heart problems and they say, well, if you were to have a heart attack, in this conversation, the proxy can ask and the conversation can occur, if you were to have a heart attack, do you want to be resuscitated, right? And it'd be an opportunity to explain, well, under these conditions, yes, under these conditions, no, and whether or not what's called a DNR, do not resuscitate, should be given. And so those kind of conversations. So if we know our health history, we can even present scenarios. In this case, yes. That case, no. Again, none of this is enjoyable, but I think very necessary. And again, just a real act of charity and justice to the person that we're asking doing this, because I will say it might be our medical proxy that ultimately makes the decision of whether or not our lives conclude, whether the dying process reaches its culmination. So they're making the decision in terms of death. And I will mention just with that, in terms of your assessment, ask yourself whether your proxy can live with that. So I know one case from many, many years ago, an adult daughter was asked to be the proxy. She had to make a decision. It resulted in the death of one of her parents. It was a good decision. It was a morally sound decision. Years later, she still felt guilt about that.
Oh, wow.
So also the emotional state of the person can be part of the discernment in terms of who do we ask to be a proxy. But,
Absolutely.
But we've given you some thoughts, folks. Again, this is like, woo, happy. Right?
And I'd like to recommend once again Father Kirby's book, We Are the Lord's, which addresses a lot of these issues in very succinct and understandable fashion.
Wow.
So we carry it right here at the Catholic Company.
Woo! And I didn't ask her to say that. No.
He didn't. He really didn't.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that these thoughts on the advanced directives and medical proxy have been helpful to you. God bless you.
Join us next time.